All right, so I've gone through and I've double checked my work, and I've looked at the shapes in my face and kind of tweaked the kind of shapes, adjusted their placement, and kind of looked at the angles to make sure that everything was correct. Once I start to add value to my drawing, while I can correct mistakes, it becomes harder to do so. The graphite can stain the paper. It's a really kind of soft lead, and it works its way into the tooth or the texture of the paper. So it can kind of stain the paper really easily. But my grid is going to start to disappear once I start to add value here. And that's going to also mean that most of my drawing strategies are going to disappear with my grid, making it harder for me to fix anything if I discover, that the eye is in the wrong place, for example. So I want to make sure that I've kind of taken that time in order to double check my work, right? Then I grab out my supplies, and I have a sharp pencil, and I have a little bit of a kneaded eraser. And I'm going to grab my my handheld sharpener too, just in case. And I just use a little dish. This is an old, sharpened the tip right off my pencil. An old yogurt container to hold any of the shavings. So I'm going to start in the eye, and we're going to work from adjacent area to adjacent area to adjacent area, kind of working our way around the eye as we go. And I'm going to start by working really loosely, and then I'm going to continually circle back and kind of tighten up my drawing, or continually go back and add more detail. When I start, I'm going to be thinking about putting in my darkest values first. I don't have to fully commit to them being dark, but I want to start to block in the shapes that I'm seeing. So I'm gonna look, say, at the edge of the iris here, and it's a soft edge, right? It's not defined like, say, the edge of his helmet. So I'm gonna kind of put that in a little bit here. It's kind of darker. His eyes are darker around the edges. And I'll start to put in his pupil. So there's overlapping here in his lid. Kind of define that and pull some of that value inside. And I see there's a little bit of dark here, even in the corner. His eyes are really tiny. I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit. Just by putting in those, few dark values, we can already see that his eye is starting to take shape. Let me zoom in just a little bit more. Okay. And move that over here. Ooh. In my video. Okay, let me try to line these up. Okay, good. All right, so I've kind of placed in this little bit of a dark value in the corner, and a little bit of a dark value into the tear duct. And there's kind of a soft edge here. You should see a cast shadow typically over the top of the eye from where the eyelid and the eyelashes cast a shadow onto his eyeball. And then I'm going to kind of pop out and start to work in the dark here around the lid. So another area where I would say I have a clean line, and soften that out. Now my grid lines I did yesterday when I was done double checking my work, I did take my kneaded eraser and I lightened up all of my grid lines. So right now I'm just shading right over that line. As long as the grid line is lighter than the area of his face that I'm shading, I can just shade right over that grid mark, and it's gonna kind of integrate in with the graphite and disappear. But if the area of his face or his helmet, whatever, is lighter, then I would need to kind of finish erasing the grid line. Okay, and I draw a clean line here again where that lid is and pull that down. I'm gonna keep my pencil as sharp as I can while I'm working. And I'm gonna find in his eye, you know, just like everything else, that I'm gonna have a full range of value. So that means that I'm gonna have everything from really light values, maybe even some areas of white values, all the way to areas that are really dark and maybe even black values. I'm gonna have all of that present in kind of each space that I'm working. Okay, and then get a little bit down here at the bottom. I can see that his eye, now we refer to the eyes as being white, right? The whites of his eyes, but they're in fact not white. And one thing that I can use to help me is a paper punch. So I can take a piece of notebook paper, for instance. There's a paper hole where it would go into the 3-ring binder, possibly. If you have a paper punch on hand, you can use one of those as well. But I can punch a hole in a sheet of paper, and I can look at his eye, for example, and see that, you know, what I would think of as the white part of his eye when compared to white paper is actually not white. And so in order for me to create the right value in his face, in order to make that feeling of it being three-dimensional, I'm gonna need to have that same range of value there, okay? So it sometimes feels like a little counterintuitive, like maybe I'm making this a little too dark, but I want to create that same value that's in my photograph. And I can use a little bit of my kneaded eraser to help me with the gradients, because this is a pretty tiny little space. His eye is, you know, not much bigger than a fingernail, really. Okay. So I'm just working my way kind of through and around and back. I can see within his iris there are value changes. Oftentimes you're gonna see the values kind of radiate out right from the pupil. In the case of his eyes, I don't see that. His eyes are green, and so they're going to be a medium value overall, right? Darker than, say, blue, but lighter than brown. Okay, and then I want to start to work out here. Notice I'm not worried about his eyelashes. I'm gonna do those after I have the kind of whole area of his eye finished, because I want the eyelashes to overlap the way they would naturally in space, right? So I want them to be drawn kind of on top of, you know, either, you know, the part of his eye or the kind of part of his upper lid here. So I can, again, add some value. I can go back in with my kneaded eraser and pull value away. I'm still using my good smooth shading skills. I'm still kind of layering in alternate directions in order to kind of blend out my work. If you use the idea of removing the opposing force to help you draw lightly, that's still a great strategy here, right? I'm just gonna kind of set, if you look, his hair is dark. So I'm just gonna set that a little bit off to the side. It's gonna help me understand better what is happening with his skin. We read things by making comparisons. So my understanding of what the value of his skin is based on, you know, everything else that's happening around. It's just like size. If you guys have ever seen photographs where in the photo, you know, there's a quarter. The quarter gives us a size reference because we all know the size of a quarter. So then you can see, you know, that compared to his eye, for example, and it allows us to have a better understanding of scale. So we always are reading by comparing. I don't need to spend a ton of time developing this area yet, but just by kind of buffering, just by putting that dark next to his skin allows me to see that I've created really a light value here, where I might have thought, gosh, that feels dark, but it's not. I can see that now. I had mapped out some of these values on his face, so that's really good for me. I know where those shapes exist, and I can not worry about, are they in the right place? Am I drawing these values in the right place? I can just really focus in on thinking about how much has the value changed. So, you know, how much darker is it here in the center versus, you know, kind of or next to his nose where there's some shadowing versus here in the center of his lid, because I know that the placement is already correct. I've double checked that work and done that time to make sure that I'm happy with the location of everything, okay? So I'm gonna continue to be working. I'm just gonna be working kind of circling around through his eye. I can pull my weight down across his cheek. That's just smooth shading. And I can work my way up and into and over his brow. I do have a video on the eyebrow shared already on PowerSchool. But in order to kind of prep for that, and since my space is really quite small, I'm just gonna shade right over the shape I drew for the eyebrow lightly. I still want to be able to see the shape, but I want to be able to develop the texture of the eyebrow without being worried about filling in the whole paper, because I've already done that. I've got the paper already toned, okay? All right, so we're just gonna be working. We're starting with value. Everything has a full range of value, and we're gonna be moving from one area to the area right next door to the area right next door, starting by just kind of blocking in those darks and then continually going back through and adding in more and more details. And details are really just smaller value changes. That's all they are. We're thinking about shape first, then we're thinking about value. And in the case of our eyebrow, we'll get to the next step, which would be to add texture. So it's always going to be shape first, then value, then texture.